you so much for having me. I was looking back, and this is our fourth season of doing this, and this is really the fact that you host this for folks is just wonderful because I mean, in the world of I just need to do a YouTube video or a TikTok to find out about different things. There is no YouTube or TikToks about doing this process of completing a independent school tuition assistance application, right? It's very specific. And so I'm so glad that each year we get to host this and kind of work together with you to talk through this process because there really is nothing more stressful in our lives than talking about our children and our finances. And in a tuition assistance forum, we're asking you to do both of those things. And so from a parent's perspective, we know that this can be very kind of nerve-wracking and stressful. So taking the temperature down, talking you through all the things you need to be prepared for, and helping you walk away with a sense that you kind of know what's going on. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. So give me one moment while I set that up and get that, start sharing my PowerPoint here. So give me 1 minute. Swapperoo. Okay, fabulous. Okay, so again, Lynn had introduced me, and again, this is our fourth year working together. So I work for a company called Mission Enrollment, and I've been working with independent schools now for over 25 years. And our company and Mission Enrollment, we work with schools all over the country. We work with about 130 schools, and this year we will actually process 18,000 applications. And so, from the whole point of this presentation is to come at this from multiple angles. The first one being, like I said, there was no YouTube videos out there. So Lynn and I, a couple of years ago, were like, we should do a video for families on how to complete this form, make it a little bit easier, a little bit clearer. And so the first perspective I want to share with you is that, from someone that reviews these files every day, there are a lot of common mistakes that parents make. And so by coming to a video like this, it will help you to say, oh yeah, I remember she said to grab this and make sure you have this in front of you. So coming from a perspective of clearing the air about what to do and how to get the information into the system, depending on what financial aid platform you're going to be filling out. The other perspective I share is that I'm also a parent of two independent school kids. My kids have been in independent school. I live in Southern California, and they've been in independent school since they were 18 months old. And now I have a fifth grader and a seventh grader. So we've been in this game for a long time as parents. And so I actually share quite a bit in here about what my husband and I do, completing these forms. I'm also a business owner. So there are some unique questions around business owners. Business owners tend to have cash flow issues, right? You get paid certain times of the year. And so making an independent school affordable can be, challenging to get your head wrapped around when you own a business because cash flow could be a concern. And how do you manage that? How do you set up your budgeting? So we talk a little bit about that. And then lastly, I come from a perspective, I used to work at what was called the National Association of Independent Schools. So based in Washington, D.C., Independent Schools membership organization. And, for 50 or 60 years, they've been researching children's success throughout independent school, and then when they go off into the world and become these amazing humans, whether they go off to college or they go off to be entrepreneurs or to the Peace Corps or to the military, wherever they go from having attended an independent school, they are better prepared. They are global citizens. They are making really big, thoughtful decisions about their lives because of this education that they've been gifted. And I say it's gifted, and certainly from the perspective of a parent to say, you are making a sacrifice to send your children to an independent school, but is an investment that is going to pay dividends in the long run. What is not going to happen right away, and rest assured, I am still waiting for that day, but my children have not said thank you yet. So as much as I would love it that my kids would recognize the sacrifice that we're making and this effort that we've put forth and that what you guys are putting forth, it's going to be a while until we all get thanked for the hard work. So on behalf of your children, as we embark on this little webinar tonight, I want to thank you on behalf of your children. I don't care if you make $50,000 a year or $500,000 a year. This is a sacrifice. This is an investment. You certainly could spend your money on lots of different things in this world, and everything is getting more expensive, and we acknowledge that. That's certainly not lost on school folks. So we do realize that this is quite an investment that you're making. And so even tonight, coming for this webinar or watching it at a later date, this is all time spent that you are investing in your child. So I really appreciate that time and effort. Particularly on as we're coming closer to the holidays, everybody's got stuff going on at night. And so even taking the time tonight to come and listen to this webinar, we so appreciate it. So like Lynn had mentioned, if you have any questions as we're going through the presentation, just post your questions into the chat feature, then we'll be able to look at it. If it's important for us to stop right away and talk about it, we'll do that. If not, we'll leave questions to the end, and I'll leave time at the end for us to talk about some of the questions that might have come through. I'm going to walk you through a couple of things. One, just how does the process work for PK through 8 and really grades 9 through 12 if you go on to higher into secondary, if you go on to upper school for independent school, how that process works. And then, we're going to talk a little bit about family budgeting. When you have gone from not having tuition to having tuition for the next 8 to 10 years, it does require some planning and organizing. And so I want to talk a little bit about family budgeting. And then we're going to walk through the application process for Clarity, which is one of the 6 financial aid platforms that independent schools typically use. We're going to, I have some screenshots for you, but honestly, it's just one that I'm going to hop into live. And so I've got it queued up already. So I'm going to go into my fake account and I'm just going to take you to some areas just to help you kind of navigate the website. It is a very clean and modern website. You can actually do it even on your phone. It's mobile ready. Not that I would recommend you doing it on your phone. I would recommend sitting down at your desk and doing it, but you certainly could. It is a very modern application. But I want to take you in live and have you see the applications process kind of in real time. So that's our plan for tonight. So first off, tuition assistance 101. So every independent school obviously is non-public, right? So it is independent. So you have a tuition rate for every school. Different grades have different tuition rates. So you have the tuition of the school minus what a family can afford to pay. And the gap between what a family can afford to pay and the tuition is filled in with a financial aid award or a financial aid grant. Some schools call it an award, some schools call it a grant. That gap of what we can afford and what the tuition is an award or a grant. And it's based on families' demonstrated financial need. It's not based on whether or not you have a child that's an exceptional soccer player or a tuba player. It is not based on your credit score. It is simply based on financial capacity to pay and what is the max a family can afford to pay. And then that difference is built in with an award from the school. The awards come directly from the schools. So every school has their own program. Different levels of fundraising have happened to fill up the coffers of being able to grant financial aid and tuition assistance. And so what makes independent schools so wonderful is that every independent school can have their own type of protocols and pedagogy. And some can be Montessori, some can be college prep, some can be international baccalaureate. Independent schools have their own programs, progressive, conservative, whatever type of program. So finding the right school is going to be really important for you as a family. But because these independent schools are independent of the federal government, there's no funding that comes from the government. And so it's kind of an all for one and one for all. And monies that are used to fund the tuition assistance programs come from usually annual giving from families, a donor perhaps, or a philanthropist that comes and donates money, and then from the operating budget of the school. So it's a limited resource. It's not unlimited, and it's not something that is the same for every school. It just depends on how much fundraising they can do to build up their reserves to be able to give out these discounted tuition rates. It is not something that a family has to pay back. It is not a loan. It's not like higher ed where you get packaged with the FAFSA with a plus loan or something that has to be paid back. This is something that is gifted to the family. It's not something you're required to pay back. But I mentioned the fact that it's fundraising that raises the money to go to these programs. So the money that's being used now was fundraised from families that came before you, and then there'll be families that come after you that we want to make sure that these programs perpetuate on. And the way that happens is through annual giving. So when your kids do go off into the world and they become these amazing humans doing lots of cool things, and they're ready to be philanthropic, having them give back to the independent school that they attended would be a wonderful gift, and that will help continue these programs to go on for generations. And that's something that's sort of a wonderful piece of these programs. But I know the main concern from families is this a loan? Is it something I need to pay back? Is it based on my credit? And none of those things are the same. So we want to make sure that you're clear on that. And so You might have the best soccer player in the world, and that's wonderful. But that's not what we're talking about tonight. It's all about financial need. So navigating where you go. So we've using with Green Vale here, we have their website up. You're going to go to the admissions tab of the school's website, go to the tuition and assistance link, right? This is on the left-hand side. When you click on that, it's going to take you to the page that gives you all of the details. What is our program? What is the deadline dates to apply? What is the cost of the application? And what system that the school is using? So if you have kids in upper school and you have kids in lower school, or if you have kids that go to multiple different independent schools, it is not universal that everybody uses Clarity or everybody has, December 15th as their deadline. Every school sets the platform that they're using, the deadline dates, and the documents that are required for that school. So please, please, please pay attention if you have children attending different schools or you're applying to multiple schools. You want to go to the school's website. I would just take a piece of paper, put your kiddos' names. What schools are you considering, or what do they currently attend? What is the deadline date for that school? And what financial aid platform or tuition assistance platform are they using? And what documents are going to be required? You might luck out, and most schools are using Clarity. So you might luck out and say, okay, these 3 schools that our kids attend are definitely using Clarity. Great. So you're just filling out the Clarity form one time for your family. But if you have a child that's going to upper school and that school is using SSS, then you're going to need to complete the SSS form in addition to the Clarity form, and then check on the deadline dates, because again, it's not going to be universal that everybody has the same deadline date for their families. The one thing that is universal is that all independent schools have an admissions tab, and they always post on their tuition or tuition and affordability. They might even call it financial aid, flexible tuition, whatever they call it. It's always going to be very close to where the tuition is going to be the details about tuition assistance and financial aid platforms. So you'll go to the website and then get their process. So do that effort now while you're getting ready to get these forms completed. And then I would just pick a Saturday, sit down, and then just get them all done at the same time, well in advance of the deadline, so that you just kind of get that off your plate. So budgeting 101. Now, I know that all of you are perfectly capable of doing a family budget. We've all had to do it. We've certainly had to do it a lot more since COVID, with the increase of groceries, gas, clothing. Everything is more expensive. Insurance. Everything is more expensive than it was a year ago, and certainly more expensive than a couple of years ago. So this is something that I recommend that you do, not just because it's good to do your budget annually, though that is a good practice, but it essentially gives you the answers to about 50% of the questions on the Clarity application. So Lynn had mentioned that the Clarity application, it's more streamlined, it gives more insights into things, but it actually is more budget-based analysis and looking at what your actual expenses are, and doing a kind of a better assessment of what are people spending in your area, as opposed to assuming that you live in Cleveland, Ohio. And so because of that, you're going to be asked some more specific questions. Your numbers matter in this platform, meaning if in your mind you're like, oh, I think I spent about $1,200 a month on groceries, and it's really something like $2,000 a month or $1,500, don't just guess. Do a quick budget. What my husband and I do, I mean, this is literally a sample from my budget from about 8 months ago. I was just kind of I was plugging in maybe what was hope versus reality. I was hopeful of what I was spending. And now that I look at it, like, nobody in a family of 4 can spend $250 a month on just groceries. And I mean, going out to restaurants, just Chick-fil-A alone is costing us like $90 for a family of 4. And we have hockey, we have baseball, we have all the things. We are out on the road. We are definitely buying lots of fast food from time to time. So be realistic about what your budgets are looking like right now. What we do, my husband and I, we essentially just take 2 months of bank statements, download them into an Excel spreadsheet, and then tag them with the different categories. So I break it out by housing, transportation, food, utilities. What are the kids' needs? So things like clothing. My son plays hockey, so there's sports, there's fees associated with that. My daughter plays piano, and so there's fees associated with her stuff. My daughter has dyslexia, so we have some additional tutoring costs related to her dyslexia. So all of the things that you have in your budget, putting those into categories. I use 2 months just as a way to benchmark, to say, what is our average over a 2-month period of time? And then again, those questions that you're going to see in the clarity application around monthly expenses and annual expenses, you have them right in front of you. So you don't have to be racing around and you don't have to be guessing on it. When you're done doing your monthly budget, just kind of taking pulling back and saying, all right, now for the year, what are the expenses that we experience as a family? Because tuition is only from the academic year. You might also be covering things like, our kids are only now kind of at the age where they don't have to be, the oversight of babysitting in the summer is not as robust. But I certainly don't want them stuck here all summer, sitting watching television for 10 hours a day and playing video games. So thinking about the summer, you have summer school costs, you have summer camps and clubs and babysitting and all those things. So really pulling back and saying, okay, monthly, here's what we're looking at, but what are some of the annual expenses associated with our household? Make sure you're being realistic. Looking at the other expenses related to school, because it's not just tuition, right? You might have trips that the kids need to go on if you're looking at a school that has tuition, that has uniforms. I know my son seems to be growing out of his shoes every 6 weeks now. So the cost of getting new uniforms, if there's any sports fees, things like that. So making sure you're looking at this from the perspective of monthly and then annually. And so that'll give you a good sense of how much can you be contributing to an independent education. Most schools will offer, one payment, two payments, like half year payments, and then a 10-month plan is the more kind of standard program. And you can decide to do a 10-month plan, and then you're just baking tuition into your budget on a monthly basis. And that will help you to kind of plan, particularly with those that have cash flow situations where you might get paid different times of the year. And so doing the 10-month plan for my family is really how we're able to make it affordable. So thinking through your budget, because there is also going to be a question on there that says, how much do you think you can afford to pay? And we want you to be realistic about it. We want you to, make sure you're doing your part, but we also don't want you to just throw out some number that has no basis in reality. And then the school says, oh, great, it looks like grandma and grandpa must be paying because they're offering to pay like double what we thought they could afford to pay. And they're not going to not take that number. And so then you might think, oh my gosh, how could they possibly think I can afford to pay that? Well, that's what you said you could afford. So just pay attention to the questions related to affordability. And if you do this effort first, it is just going to make this application so much easier and you'll be able to answer most of those questions. And then most of the additional questions are items that are found on your tax return. So between these two, it'll really give you what you need to complete this form. I apologize for drinking tea, but my whole family, we're all kind of just sort of recovering from the most recent iteration of whatever sickness is going through. So just give me 1 second here. I don't want to be coughing on everybody here, virtually coughing on all of you. Okay, so the timeline for success. In the fall, which we are beyond, fall came and went. We all had our pumpkin spice lattes. We have moved on to, peppermint mochas at the point. So it is the winter now. It is time to be thinking about two things. If you are a new family to independent school, the admissions process, right? You're going through the admissions process now. If you're a returning family, you're going to be wanting to make sure you get this done by the deadline because re-enrollment is right around the corner. And so you want to make sure you're aware of the deadline dates for your tuition assistance application. So for returning families for Green Vale is December 15th. And then for this school, for new families, it's a rolling enrollment type situation. So you would complete the form as quickly as possible. For admissions, this is a simultaneous process. So don't complete your admissions form and then say, great, your kid got in, wonderful. Oh, I need financial aid, I need tuition assistance. Like, no, you got to do it at the same time. So it is a simultaneous process. So make sure you're completing the tuition assistance form at the same time as you're going through your admissions process. And then, like I said, for returning families, make sure you get it in by the deadline, which is the 15th, which is, right around the corner. So sit down. There is no gold star for, or nobody gets extra prize for getting their application in before the deadline, but there is absolutely a disadvantage to doing it late. Schools do not have a lot of time to turn these applications around, and they might need more information from you. There might be some additional information they need, and you're going to be scrambling, running around while the holidays are here, and it's going to get very challenging and cause a lot of unnecessary stress. So make sure you take the time now while it's still a little bit more quiet than at the end of the calendar year, to get all this taken care of. One thing I want to make note too is probably like you, I love my 20% off coupons. I also love the fact that they make you put an email address in to get your 20% off coupon. So I have deemed my 20% off coupon email address that I use. I put that in, I get my coupon, and then I never go back to that inbox other than to get my coupons. Whatever you do, do not set up your application using a junk or a 20% off coupon email address. Use an email address that you have readily access available to. This is where the partnership really begins between the school and the family. And so they can communicate to you as well as Clarity. If you're missing something, they're going to communicate through email and through the email address you used to set up your application. So make sure you're using an email address that you have readily available to, that you check on a regular basis. So to make sure that you don't miss a request or miss a document ask or a question that the school might have. So if, for some reason you filled this form out last year and now you're a returning family and you're filling out the Clarity application again, but you no longer have access to that email address, not a problem. Reach out to Clarity. They will ask you some security questions and then they can reset you with a new email address. So it's okay to use an email address. And then if you have to change it in the future, that's fine too. But just make sure you use an email address that is something that you check regularly. It's going to be important to have good communication here. By the winter time, the schools are going to be doing their re-enrollment contracts for the returning families. And so typically around February 3rd, the returning families will get their re-enrollment contracts with their new award for the next academic year and the new tuition rates. By March 1st, the re-enrollment contracts are going to be due. So don't wait, don't forget, make sure you go through that process and get everything in and get everything done by March. In the early spring, depending on what school you're attending or you're applying to, or with Green Vale, it's rolling, you want to make sure that you, by early spring, you're going to know if your child got in, if you applied kind of in advance of that time. And on your admissions application, if you've been admitted, your award is going to be listed on your notification. So you'll be able to know by early spring what you're going to be paying. So make sure by the late spring, you've got all of any documents that were still required. Make sure your file is complete and all buttoned up and ready to go. And then you're going to start setting up your tuition payment plan if you're going to do the tuition payment plan and get that ready to go. And then you'll start making your payments in usually the late spring, early summer, depending on the school. Come fall, rinse and repeat. And we go through this process. This is something you're going to do each and every year. And you get used to completing these forms. Once your kids go off to upper school, it'll be a very similar process. And then once they go off to college, again, it'll be a very similar process where you're completing this form on an annual basis. The goal meaning we want to make sure that if things have changed in your lives, that we're catching up to you to know that something has changed and maybe there's been a change of circumstances. So that's why we have you complete it each and every year. Okay, so I want you to really, again, I want you to approach this with a sense of calmness. So first things first, getting that budget taken care of. I just do the downloading of the two into a spreadsheet. I love Excel, so that works for me. But many people like to use those tools. There are some more sophisticated tools, but there's one called You Need a Budget, YNAB. Cool little website. It'll pull in that data for you, and it'll do some budget assessment stuff for you. There's also Rocket Money is another one out there that will kind of pull in the data for you. It doesn't matter. Whatever you choose to use is fine. Just doing the budget first before you complete this form is just going to be a good exercise to get everything you need pulled together for the application. Outside of the budgetary questions are going to be tax related questions. So if I were to ask you, how much did you make last year? Most people know what they make. Oh, I make $60,000 a year. I make $75,000 a year. But if I were to ask you, what did you pay in federal tax returns last year? Or what was your adjusted gross income? Or what did you report on line number 12 of the 1040? You're probably not going to know that off the top of your head. I do taxes for a living, and I couldn't tell you what those numbers were for my own tax returns. So in short of just trying to guess on these numbers, having your 2023 taxes in front of you while you're completing this form will help you estimate. Nobody has 2024 taxes yet, it's too early. So in lieu of that, using your 2023s as your estimator, and it'll give you the answers to a lot of the questions that they're going to be related to tax documents. And then having your W-2s if you're a W-2 employee, and then if you own a business, having your corporate tax returns and your K-1s in front of you will help you to complete the form. Now, if your life has wildly changed from 23 to 24, you lost a job, you gained a job, you started a business, you closed a business, then you want to have more current data in front of you as you're completing this form. Using a most recent paycheck stub at this point is as close to a W-2 as you're going to get. It's almost a full year's worth of data if you've been working since January. And so having that in front of you, so if in 2023 you weren't working, and now in 2024 you are working, use the numbers that are on your paycheck stub instead of having it say 0, because you are actually working at this point. So having what you have in 2024, if it's been very different, can be very helpful to complete the form. All of this is just about estimating. You can only do your only best guess, but just take your time with it. As you go through the application, there's these little like purple think bubbles that if you don't understand what the question is asking you, then hover over it and it's going to say, okay, what we're looking for here is interest income. And you go to line number X on the 1040 to find this number. And so it'll help you to pull those data points together. If you do have multiple children, maybe one in lower school going to Green Vale, and then you have a kid in upper school going to a different school, and you might have to complete more than one application, just plan accordingly. Like I said, deadline dates, documents, and system are not universal. So make sure you know who is asking for what system and what they will have you complete, and the deadline date for that. With the 2023 taxes, so in Clarity, the difference between, if you've done this before previously, if you filled out a financial aid form previously where you uploaded your tax returns, this system actually pulls the tax returns directly from the IRS. And so you're going to give them an authorization, which is called a 4506C, which says, I authorize the IRS to pull the tax data directly into the Clarity application, instead of me having to scan it and upload it into the application. And so by completing the 4506C, you might not have to upload your tax return. There are some exceptions to that. So if you filed extension for 2023, the file extension date ended on October, I think it was October 15th. So it takes the IRS at least 5 to 7 weeks to create what's called a tax transcript. It's like your tax return, but just in a different layout. It does take the IRS 7 weeks to get that. What Clarity is pulling in is not your tax return. They are pulling in your tax transcript. So if you just filed your 2023s, your tax transcript might not be ready yet. If it's not ready yet, you're going to get notification from Clarity that they were not able to pull your tax transcript in, and you might still have to upload your tax return. So just be aware that even if you filled out the form to say, yep, go ahead, pull my taxes, there might be a reason why they can't pull it in. So just make sure you have a copy of your most recently filed tax returns, which is the 2023s, available to upload in case you're asked to do that. I want you to have a sense of clearness about, what is the matrix? Kind of Lynn alluded to this in the beginning, say, we don't want it to be a black box of, you put information in and you can then only guess what we choose as reviewers to come up with what you can afford to pay versus what another person can afford to pay, which what another person can afford to pay. How do we come up with the numbers that evaluate this? So no matter what system a school is using, everybody in my company, we review files in every financial aid system. They all fall into 3 categories. What is most important for you all to know, and again, this is part of that partnership piece, the schools are only as knowledgeable about your financial situation as what you share and what you give for tax documentation. So if you've had a change of circumstances in the areas of income, assets, and family size, you need to let the school know so that they're aware that there's been a change of circumstances. But in order of importance, it goes from income, looking at income, then assets, and then how many people live in the household to account for expenses. And then if we have grandma and grandpa and such. But income is the first piece of the puzzle. We know that you're paying us from the money coming into your house. That's what most people are paying. We're not asking families to liquidate their retirement. We're not asking families to take out a home equity loan. We're not asking families to completely, decimate any savings that they have to be able to send their child to independent school. What we're looking at as we're assessing that, we want you to give us a percentage of your discretionary income. And what is discretionary income? That is income coming into the house. So if you have a W-2 or you get a paycheck or you take a draw from your business, minus your expenses, money coming out of the house. There are things that all of us have that we have no control over, right? We have to pay for housing, clothing, food, insurance, taxes. All of those things are essential pieces of living in our community, in our houses. What's left over, that money is called discretionary income. That money is then, you can choose to spend it on anything else in life, more expensive cars, more expensive homes, going on vacations, all the things you spend your money on. And we're asking you to contribute a percentage of that to non-public education. We then look at assets and liabilities. So then we're looking at, do you own your own home? Are you renting? Do you have secondary homes? Do you have rental properties? Do you have student loan debt? Many of us, like myself, will be, paying on student loan debt till the day I die, perhaps. So we have assets minus your liabilities that you have. Some of us have medical debts, things of that nature. So we're looking at your asset profile. Things like cash in the bank. Do you have long-term savings? Do you have investments? Do you have retirement savings? And we're looking at all of those pieces of the puzzle. And then we're looking at the family makeup. Are you a family of 3? Are you a family of 4? Are you a family of 5? Do grandma and grandpa live in the household? Many of us are now part of what we call this sandwich, the sandwich generation, where I fall into this category. My mom and dad live in my backyard half the year, not in a tent, they have a house. They live in our backyard and we care for them. And then I have young children that I'm caring for. So we're both caring for elderly parents and for our children. And so when we look at family members in your household, we're looking at not just your immediate family, but if you're caring for elderly parents, if they are living in your house or in your yard, in your community, then you're going to list them as part of your household. If they are living independently and you are just providing support to them, maybe you send $1,000 a month to grandma and grandpa, but they're still living independently, then you're going to list it under what's called elder care. So those are the ways that we're looking at your family. When you're a new family, we don't know grandma and grandpa. We don't know that they come to all the holiday events and that they show up to school and pick you up and pick the kids up. So until we really know the community, we know your family, making sure you're sharing with us how your family is configured, because it might not show up on your taxes. I don't claim my parents on my tax return, so you wouldn't know that they live in my backyard. So again, the more you can overshare in this area, the better equipped the school is going to be to do their job. So Lynn had mentioned over the years, it started at a couple thousand folders, but now we're up to about 18,000 folders that we review every year. I not myself personally, I have a team of 16. But there are some common things that we find people make mistakes on. And I want to help you to avoid that, because it slows the process up, it stresses everybody out. So like I said about the taxes, having those in front of you and having your budget in front of you essentially gives you all of the answers to the entire application without you having to run around the house and say, okay, now what was that number? And let me go grab this. And we want to have everything in front of us. Sit down, like Lynn said, it'll take about a half an hour to complete the form. So use your taxes as your guide. If you are remarried, regardless of who is supporting the child that's living in the home, we need you to have them both listed on the application, you and your new spouse. We're going to be looking at your taxes. Everything needs to jive, because remember on the other slide, it was income minus expenses, family members living in the house. And so we need to make sure we're accounting for everybody. And what is the income coming into the house, the collective income of the parents living in the household? Your ex-spouse will complete their own form. There will be no crossover of data, so there's no concerns about them seeing your information, you seeing their information. So if you are remarried, we do need you to complete the form as a married couple. Itemizing unusual situations. So for example, if you just had a death in the family and then you had to pay for a funeral, that would be an unusual, unexpected expense. But make sure you leave good notes. Don't just say, oh, I had a $10,000 expense and no notes. So we don't know, does that mean that you went to the Bahamas or that you had a funeral that you had to cover the cost of? So that partnership piece is going to be really important. So share those notes and details with us. What do you truly think you can afford to pay? Nobody pays $0 at independent schools, as much as they would all love to be able to do that. Everybody has to pay something. So just make sure that you do the budget piece first, so you have a realistic number on what you think you can afford to pay. The question around how much you think you can afford to pay, for some reason, people sometimes put the tuition there, and they don't understand the question or whatever. Don't put the tuition in what you think you can afford to pay. Put what you think you can afford to pay in that question around affordability. Because if you could afford to pay full price, then you certainly wouldn't be completing a form. So just pay attention to the questions around affordability. And then lastly, double counting income. Business owners have struggled for some reason with W-2 earnings and profit from business. And so depending on how your business is configured, really just pay attention to the questions so that you don't list your business income in one area and then list it again in another area, and then it gets double counted. So these are the sort of the standard questions we get from everybody. So a lot of people don't like to ask this question, but what if we're not divorced yet, but we're separated and we're heading to divorce, or we're actually divorced? If you're separated and not quite divorced yet, or you're divorced, we want you to apply separately. Mom or dad would complete one form and the other parent would complete their own form. And then on the back end, we're going to be able to look at those forms and look at all of your information. Now, in 2023, you might have still been married filing jointly. That's okay. We're going to pull in that same tax return for each of you, and we'll be able to parse out what's your income, what's their income. So if you are living in separate households, we want to make sure we're accounting for the fact that you have actually more expenses now because you're paying for two houses, all the things, right? So make sure you do apply separately. We don't want you trying to jam two households worth of information onto one application. So if you are separated, living in separate households, even if you're not divorced yet, please fill out the form separately. We do expect parents to be working and earning an income. And what if they're a stay-at-home parent by choice? So there are a couple of exceptions to that rule. In the beginning, I talked about the fact that we have tuition minus what a family can afford to pay. And then we fill that gap with an award from the school. The assumption is that families have done everything they can do to gather all the money that they can gather to cover the cost of the education. Then they're coming to the school saying, okay, we've exhausted all of our resources first. Now we're coming you to fill that gap for us. And the assumption is that if we have a working parent that's capable of working, we need them to earn that money to contribute to that child's education. And that way it's fair and equitable for all parents. If the parent is not working by choice and doesn't qualify for an exception, we will likely add income to that non-working spouse, and it's typically the cost of minimum wage over the course of a year. But there are exceptions to that. So I want to make sure you know those exceptions. If you fall into that exception, you want to make sure you make note of that. If it says, are you working? And you say, no, I'm a stay-at-home parent, and here's the reason, or here's the situation. If you're a stay-at-home parent because you're caring for an elderly parent or a disabled child, that is your job, that is what you're doing, then absolutely that qualifies. If you are a stay-at-home parent because you just had a child or your children are under school aged, oftentimes it's cheaper to stay home until they become school age before you go back to the workforce. And then third, if you are staying home because you are not capable of working, Are you have an illness or your disability, you're not able to work, obviously that is the situation. Just letting us know what the situation is so we can take care of that. If you are someone that just lost your job, you are not a stay-at-home parent, you are just an unemployed worker. So letting us know that that's the case and we can kind of take care of that. And we'll approach it from a different perspective than a stay-at-home parent. We'll look at when you last work, did you file for unemployment, things like that. So those are the qualifications and those are the details there. You do need to apply each and every year, unfortunately, but that's the process. So I'm going to show you a couple of screens for clarity, and then we're going to just log in live, and I'm going to just take you to some key points. There's just a couple of things I want you all to be aware of before we go in log in live. So when you go to the Clarity app, it's going to default to the 25-26 academic year, which is the year you're always applying for the academic year ahead. You'll set up your account. Like I said, make sure you use an email address that you have good access to. And then you have a dashboard that's going to say, complete the form, get your documents in. If there's any communication that you've received, you'll be able to see the communication that's been sent to you there. When we talk about, this is more important about having grandparents that live in the household. So if grandma and grandpa do live in the household, you want to list them in your family's household. If you are just providing financial support for grandma and grandpa and they're living independently, you want to fill out the question around elder care. And I'll show you where that lives on the application. So they would be considered an other dependent. Any children that is living in the household that is not applying to independent school is also considered an other dependent. Your child that's applying to Green Vale is considered a student applicant. So they are either a student applicant or they are a dependent. They are never both. So don't list your kids twice. So they're either an applicant or they're a dependent. So that can be confusing because we know that they're your dependent children, but we need to know, are they an applicant or are they just a non-applicant dependent student or grandma and grandpa?
Alisa, one question on that, just back for a second.
Sure.
Is that Clarity has sort of taken off the last 2 years. And so you might have a child applying to two different children applying to two different schools who both use the Clarity platform. So if you go back, that piece is there might be two student applicants, but the applications are going to different schools. So
that's correct.
For example, you might have a 11th grader student applicant who is at Deerfield Academy, and you might have a 5th grader student applicant who's at the Green Vale School. Both use Clarity. So when you're doing that, you will select the school that they're attributed to, but understand that the one singular application works for multiple schools. It's just how you set up the student applicants.
Yep, and you know what, we're going to go in live to that section and I'll show you exactly how you do that. Yep, that's a great point. And we're going to hop in live, so I don't need to talk you through each section, but I'm going to take you in live to that. What I wanted to show you was this section here. So if you want to take a screenshot of this, this is being recorded. You'll get a copy of the recording, but take a screenshot of this. The other third missing piece of the puzzle of questions is going to be, there's going to be questions around what do you have for investments, bank accounts, retirement, housing, vehicles, debts, student loan debt, what do you owe, what is your monthly payment, things like that, credit card debts, any other loans that you have. Go and just get your most recent statement, and then you'll have the answers to really all of the questions. But assets and liabilities, there are questions around assets and liabilities, so just make sure you get a more recent statement on each of those sections so that you have a good understanding of those numbers. And then the last thing, might take a screenshot of this as well. If you own a business, just take your time there, because I always recommend that you have a copy of your, not only your corporate tax returns, your 1120s, your 1065s, and your K1s, but also your profit and loss statement and your balance sheet, because there's going to be questions related to business assets and liabilities and stuff that is not going to show up easily on your corporate tax return. You have to go digging for all that stuff. So if you just have your copy of your balance sheet and your profit and loss statement, if you use QuickBooks or whatever accounting system you're using, that'll give you a quick access to know what the status is of those answers. So having a copy of both the business taxes and your just a report, a non-audited, profit and loss statement and balance sheet will help you to answer your business questions as well. Lastly, the end of the application is where you can sort of give any additional information that, like, short of your DNA that we've asked you, if there's something else to your financial story that has not been addressed yet, then this is your opportunity. Is there anything else you'd like to share? I want to be clear though, this is about like anything about your financial story. A lot of times the schools, everybody reads these, and so it's not like you're answering this question and nobody's paying attention. Everybody reads these question and answers, but I find that like 60% of the time families are talking about how wonderful and beautiful and magical their children are, that they're a soccer star, that they scored very high on their testing and all this kind of stuff. We know that your kids deserve to be at our independent schools, but that's more of an admissions related question. That's not a what has changed in your financial story. I can't do anything about the fact that your kid's a soccer star. There's nothing to do in your financial application or change anything that's relevant for me to do that. So this is really meant to be, is there anything we haven't talked about in the previous questions that you think is relevant to your financial story? So the answer might be no, I have nothing more to tell you, and that's okay. You don't have to answer this. There's nothing more to share. But just if you do fill it out, make sure you use it in the way it's intended, and save the admissions related questions for your admissions questionnaires. And then I want to just give you, if you have a chance to do a quick screenshot of the Clarity Financial Support. So they've got an email address. You can email questions. They have a phone support. There is like in-app support via the little think bubbles, and they even have like a little chat functionality, and they have a virtual assistant too that can like answer a lot of the standard common questions. So let's hop in live. Give me a sec. Let me pop out of this. And then let me share my screen real quick and shut off the slideshow. Okay. Okay, so by the magic of television, I've already logged into my account. And along the left-hand side are all the sections of the application. So as they turn purple, you know you've completed those sections. On the bottom here, if you prefer filling out the form in English or Spanish, whatever's more comfortable, you can toggle between those two. And then as you go through the application, it is pretty straightforward. Like I said, as you hover over the think bubbles, it's going to give you, okay, we're looking for a W-2 here. This is what we're looking for. These are the details. And then you just kind of scroll through. The nice thing too is every year you complete this form, the first year is going to be the longest because you're basically setting up your account. But next year it pre-fills in all of the demographic data, the guardians, the address and all that stuff, that you basically can get started, assuming everything is still correct. You can get started on completing your actual form for the next academic year, which is great. So I'm going to pop through, and I wanted to show you that area that we were talking about. So I have 2 children. So Aiden is my son. He currently goes to Grove Middle School. He's in 8th grade. And I want to have his application sent to the Green Vale school. So I'm going to say add a school. I'm going to search for, if you start typing in green. Oh, I already listed you, sorry. I think it's the green. Here you are. And then what grade they'll be applying to for next year. So if he's currently in 8th grade, he'd be applying to 9th, but let's pretend my son is in 7th, and he's applying to 8th grade. He's not currently enrolled. I click add school to the application. And then if my child was applying to 3 or 4 schools, you would just keep adding the schools that they're applying to. He's a student applicant. And then say I have an older child that is applying to Deerfield, like we said. So you click add a student, and then it's going to pop open another student. So I have Aiden Evans up here, and then now I'm starting to complete the next row. So my daughter is Delaney Evans, and we'll start to complete her form, and it'll list her. And then I would say she's actually applying to Deerfield Academy and Massachusetts, and add school, et cetera, today, and add that to her, and then it'll start adding that. And then if you say, oops, just kidding, I didn't really mean to do that, a little trash can here, I can get rid of it. And then when we're ready to add grandma and grandpa, or in this case, and you don't add your dogs, but this is my dog. So I'm adding my pretend child that is non-applicant dependent that just was born in 2020. So Lucky Evans, not currently in school, not in school right now. And then you can keep adding your dependents the same way. So you could add grandma and grandpa, and then you hit save and continue, and you move through the application. The other area that I wanted to share with you that, kind of helps you, I think is an area that is kind of cool how they have it laid out. If you rent or you own, it's going to like give you more information. So if you're renting, it's not going to ask you about your house. If you own, it's going to ask you details about your house. So there is it is a smart application that kind of opens and closes depending on what questions you answer. Do you own a business? Yes, it's going to open up a section for businesses. If I don't own a business, I would select no, and you wouldn't see a section related to business ownership. Do you have 529 plans? All of these things. So as you go on to the next section, the cool thing is it's a bunch of toggles. So this is everything related to income. But we're going to go to I want to hop to the expenses so I can show you. So you did your budget. We did that exercise, and now you say, okay, what is it asking you about? All right, what's my average monthly expense for utilities, and what is it inclusive of? Okay, it's inclusive of electric, water, gas, internet, oil, phone bills, sewer, trash, recycling, whatever is part of your typical utilities at your house. And you realize that it's $1,700 a month or $500. Just, you can toggle it over. It's a sliding scale, so you just do your averages and slide it across. And you just go down the line for all of your questions. If it's 0, you put 0. If it's, whatever your numbers are. And these are all reasonable. It's not going to be unreasonable, in that it doesn't account for what you've got for expenses. So you go through, these are monthly. Now, it's just something to pay attention to. We're asking these are monthly questions. As you go through, I mentioned that if grandma and grandpa are someone that you're supporting, but they don't live with you, this is where you would put that monthly expense to elder care. So if you're giving them, $300 a month, or we provide support for my husband's mom and dad living in Utah, whatever it might be. And then you go on to the next question. So then it's saying, are there any out-of-pocket experience that you had in 2024, sort of the collective year of 2024? They give you a couple of examples so if everything has been accounted for on the monthly side, there might not be any additional expenses that you need to address. I mean, any other expenses. But say you did have a funeral in 2024 that you had to cover the cost of, and it was $10,000. So they give you a couple of like kind of more common out of pocket, but you can enter in your own. So for example, I would say something like, dyslexia training. And so it cost me about an additional $5,000 a year for, my daughter, has orthographic dyslexia, and we spend blah, 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 blah. So you can add some additional expenses and then enter as many as they come up. So you can keep adding them. So these would be annual expenses for the year of 2024. So now I know the year isn't completed, but as best as you can guesstimate, knowing what you already know now, because you've done that budgetary piece, which is why it's important to do that monthly piece, but then also thinking of the year, kind of year at a glance. Are there any annual expenses that are important for you to mention that haven't been listed? Lastly, I'll just take you to the business area. This is where you'd complete any business details. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then see if we have any questions. I didn't see any along the way, so hopefully that's good news. Hopefully you found that this is actually a much simpler, kind of easier to complete form compared to other systems that you've used previously. But I wanted to make sure I'm here to answer any questions. So if you have any additional questions, I'll stick on for a little period of time and answer any questions as they come up from folks. As long as my voice will continue.
No, you've been a trooper. Thank you so much. I know you're getting through this right now. I'm trying to think, some of the questions that we often are asked, different schools also have different times in which financial aid is sort of starts.
Yeah.
For our school in particular, it starts from pre-kindergarten, from the FORS program up. A lot of other schools starts at kindergarten. So it's
right.
important to know when you're with your school, when that timeline begins. And I think some of the other questions we often get asked, in terms of, there are in situations sometimes where parents do can make contributions, and will sort of, grandparents will get involved in that, and those questions will be asked on those forms. And it's important to, again, be forthcoming if there are resources that come from other sources.
Yeah. We often hear, and it's a hard topic to discuss, but when parents are separated or divorced, and one parent does not care about the idea of independent education, does not want to participate. And most schools, in fact, all schools do as a baseline require that both parents, both parents complete the form. If you are not capable of getting the other parent to complete their form, you've done your part and they're just not willing or not capable. There's two kind of things you need to do. One, you need to let them know that you're struggling to get the other parent to participate. They might be able to either play kind of an intermediary, and they might be able to reach out to the other parent on your behalf, or they might have a form of a parent be waiver form. So maybe the child's parent has never been in the child's life, and so reaching out to the school when you're having sort of what we call a non-compliant or a non-cooperative parent be, use the school as a resource. The clarity people they're not going to know what your school is going to want you to do, but don't wait till after the application deadline and say, oh, by the way, I couldn't get so and so to get it completed. Giving the school a heads up early on that you're struggling, and they might have some tips and tricks on how to get that accomplished. And then again, they might be able to give you some additional resources if parent B was never in the child's life. For example, there are standard waiver forms that the schools can offer you as well.
That's a great point. We do get that one a great deal. There's also, with, as you're looking at different independent schools, as part of the admissions process, we at Green Vale we operate under a needs blind basis in the admissions office, but not all schools operate that way. So sometimes financial aid is taken into account when they're doing the admissions process. We operate, or any needs blind school, we sort of act as church and state. And so your decision for admissions is irregardless of that financial aid piece. So it's also, as you're going through that, it's important to understand the designation that each school has.
I'm actually answering this, but I guess maybe it's a good question to share for the whole group. If grandma and grandpa do live in the household, or they come only for a couple of months out of the year, would you put them in your household? The answer is no. They would have to be with you at least 50%. You're providing 50% support, so 50% of the year. And if you are helping them when they're there for those 3 months, then to me, that you'd put it under elder care. You would not put them as living in your household. Like, that's really meant to be when grandma and grandpa are living under your, you are helping them with, housing, clothing, food, like all the things. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the elder care support piece. If they come in from Florida and hang out with you guys for 3 months, that's not what we're talking about. This is truly where you're having to support them financially.
That's a great question.
Let's see if we get any more questions.
I see one that came in. Oh, thank you. Thank you all for coming to this. Obviously, if there are more questions that are specific to our school, please reach out. Other schools, there's always somebody at that institution that handles financial aid. They're happy to answer questions. Most schools do have sort of a ticking timeline in December. So now is the time that you'd want to be speaking with them. It's sort of rare to have the rolling as we do for this, for schools like ourselves. But yeah, the more that conversation and that transparency is important.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, and we know you guys all, it's in some ways, it's you don't know what you don't know until you start to complete the form. Now, clarity, because they're there to help you as well on how to complete the forms. If you forget your password, they're there for that support as well. And you can always reach out to them for, answers to certain questions. And then again, only really using the school if it's something very unique and different, because they're so busy with admissions and doing all this other stuff and trying to review these files. Their time is very limited. So really reserve the questions for them that are really school specific. And then also, I just want to say, again, as a parent of independent school kids, it was a wonderful, and it has been a wonderful experience for us. And I know that everybody is so busy and your money is being spent on lots of different things and everybody feels like they've been stretched very thin. And I just know that I want you all to know that this is a big investment and that's certainly not lost on anybody. And we know it's a sacrifice. And so we want to thank you for even taking the time to consider an independent school, consider the costs, and kind of going on this journey. But it is definitely an investment that is worth it. It pays itself dividends. I feel like it certainly for our family it has. And there's certainly good research to suggest that your kids will go off into the world and do great things either way. But they will definitely have some additional advantages and support along the way. And then I'll hand it back to you again. Thank you so much for hosting such an event because there's just not a lot of resources out there to help parents go through this process. So I hope they feel
No.
confident about what they're doing now because they were able to attend.
No, thank you so everyone who attended tonight. For those that watch it, we'll post this, and for those that are watching after the fact, this is just that first step, and we can't thank you enough for leading this and your incredible depth of expertise and knowledge in providing this guidance.
You bet. Happy to help.
Yeah.
All right, folks, have a good rest of your week and a good holiday season and an independent school journey. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye now.